Hello, my crafty friends. This is Chari Moss for Lawn Fawn, and today I'm sharing 3 cards with you that uses the new Cozy Cats stamp set. So here is the Cozy Cats stamp set. There is also a little Cozy Cats Christmas add-on that I'm going to use today. And really, I just wanted to share with you how these cats are great for not just winter. So I have stamped out all of my cats with some Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink because this is a Copic-friendly ink and I am going to do some Copic marker coloring today. But there are always coloring stencils available for all of our new stamp sets. So I am not a big cat person. I am mostly into dogs because I have cat allergies, but these little cats are just so adorable. And I am going to color them all differently today. I do need to work on my cat coloring, I think, maybe look at some cat pictures. I tend to color mine gray all the time with stripes like I'm doing here. So I am going to color 2 of these with stripes, but I really tried to branch out and show you some different ways to color some cats today. So I just started with my shading color, then I blend it out with my lighter color, and then I come in with the darkest color and add some little details. So in this case, for this little cat, I'm adding some stripes. Now this guy over here in that big poofy scarf, which he might be my favorite actually, I'm coloring this one in the exact same way. So I started with that W5 for my shaded areas, blending out with the W3, and then I'm going to use the W7 for my little stripe details. Now I'm moving on to this little cat in the center, and this one I'm going to color in oranges. And I'm using the YR14 for the shading here, then the YR12 to blend everything out. And then I'll use that YR27, which is a little bit darker. And for this cat, I'm going to give him some little spots instead of stripes. So once I get all that blending like I want it, now I'm coming in with that darker one and just tapping, adding some little spots. I did make like a bigger spot up there on his ear, just kind of figuring out where I want those little details to be. Now for this little guy up here in the sweater, I'm going in with some browns. Now these colors actually more remind me of my dog that I used to have, which was a red short hair miniature dachshund. I use these colors a lot, but it is really fun to kind of color these kittens in the same colors of your own pets at home. So I went in with the E15, blended out with the E13, and then I'm going to go in with that E19 and add some different colors. I didn't do spots or stripes. I did some kind of big blobs of color to kind of show some larger color variations in the coat of the cat. Now for this little cat in the center, I wanted a black cat. I'm being very sparing with that N9 in the shadowy areas. I'll pull it out a little bit with the N7, but mostly I want to color all over with that N5. When you're coloring something dark like this, you don't want to lose all the details of the stamp like the face and the paws, and this N5 will give the look of that black cat but not cover everything up so much. Once that marker absorbs into the paper, we'll be able to see those details. Then for this final little kitten here, I actually pulled out some Olo markers. I'm starting with this really pale orange, which is a really kind of tan and taupey color. Then I pulled out the red grays, which are a really cool color family for Olos, and I'm giving him some big spots. So I have one over his eye, one ear, one paw. I think this looks really cool, but what I'm going to do is pull in the next darkest in that red gray category. Go over those spots again, but not all the way to the edge. So we have that softer red-gray on the outside edge of the spots and the darker in the center. And I think this cat turned out really cute with these colors. I'm blending out a little bit more with that lightest color to kind of soften the edges. Then, of course, they all need pink noses. And now I can move on to the little accessories. So I love this cat with a big chunky scarf. I'm giving him a aqua colored scarf. I started with my lightest color and then I added some details for the shading and then I'm blending it out. I'm also going to use this color for the coffee cup and the little mittens on the cat with the earmuffs. Now, these are earmuffs, but in the card I'm making today, I'm going to say they're headphones, and you'll see why here when we make that card at the end. So I use the two colors to add some shading, and then I'm pulling out an even darker color for the center or the inside of that coffee mug. There are some little accessories for the Christmas mouse from the Cozy Cats Christmas add-on, which are those little antlers and the present. I'm adding some color to those. And then, of course, my earmuffs, or we're going to say headphones, I added some gray to the part between them, and then we're going to have some pink headphones today. I'll also use that pink for the edges of my scarf. And then for this cat up here, this is going to go on a Christmas card with those little antlers, so he definitely needs a red sweater. While I'm in the Christmas mode, we might as well color this little present that will also go on the Christmas card. And I'm coloring this in some really bright greens because I know the paper I'm going to use on that card is a dark green. This cat is also going to go on the Christmas card, so I'm using those same colors I used for the sweater on the other cat for the details on his little toboggan. And then I'm going in with a green that will match the papers that I'm using and coloring the body of that little hat. We also can't forget these fun balls of yarn. I stamped them in two different directions so that I can make sure my shading was on the bottom of the yarn, because when I put them on the card, I am going to want them to be in two different directions so it looks like two different balls of yarn versus very repetitive images. And then I'm using some of the same colors I've used on these images to color in the books. So I pulled out that same aqua color. I'm using the same pink for this book. I did pull in a purple for the book that's on its side, and I always like to use a very, very pale E000 for the pages of a book. And then for that book at the bottom, I actually pulled out the same colors I used for the orange cat in the center. Now there is always coordinating dies, and we're going to use those to cut them out. You can see I also stamped some speech bubbles with manatee ink and some music notes, and those are from the Caroling Mice set. So I've cut out all my images, and I'm going to set those aside, and we're going to work on 3 different cards today. I'm starting out with a fall themed card, and this is actually the Spooky Forest backdrop. I've cut this from craft cardstock, and I'm going to use the new Favorite Flannel Fall, which this is a beautiful plaid collection, to create my ground and my trees. The first thing I'm going to do is trim off this spooky grass because we're not making a spooky card today, but I love how this background can be used for something other than a spooky Halloween card. In addition to the Favorite Flannel Fall plaids I have picked out, I also have some yellow Spiffy Speckles paper for the sky. I just think this is a fun look for a fall sky, and it gives it a little bit of a different feel. Now I'm layering my green plaid on the bottom behind my trees so I can figure out where I want to line up this stitched hillside border die. I'm just taping it in place, and then I'm going to kind of shimmy it around so it's away from my trees and run that through my die cut machine. Now I'm going to do the same to the tops of the trees. This is actually a puffy cloud border, but I think it makes great treetops. So I'm just going to kind of hold that in place about where I want it to be. I'll move those trees out of the way, and we'll run this through my die cut machine as well. And now I have some very colorful plaid trees and then a green plaid grass. So I'm going to start by adding my yellow autumn sky that is cut to 4¼ by 5½ to a standard size card base. Then I can add my grass, which is cut slightly smaller, but the edges are going to be covered up by that spooky tree backdrop. And then I can add my colorful tree boughs up above. Again, that is cut a little bit smaller, but all that will be covered up by the spooky trees. Now I do want a bit of a frame around this, so I'm using the stitched rectangle frames, and this fits perfectly on all of our backdrop dies and gives you a great frame around everything. I cut this from Lawn Fawn's Mermaid cardstock, And I'm just layering this over top, and now look at that perfect mermaid colored frame around those trees. To give it a little more dimension, I did put some foam strips all over the back, and I'll just pop this right onto my card, and we're gonna have this great dimension between the background, trees and sky, and the trees in the front. Now to add my cute little cat. For this card, I'm using that cat with that big chunky scarf. I think he's perfect for fall. And then I have a little speech bubble that says, "Keep it cozy." For the sentiment on this card, I'm going to build the sentiment that says, "Have a cozy day." The best thing about sentiments in Lawn Fawn stamp sets is that the words are on a rectangular base and they're super easy to line up. So I'm just butting each of these stamps right up against each other, and I can just pick this up with a block, and I have a perfectly spaced sentiment. I am going to add my exclamation point separately, but now it says, "Have a cozy day," which I'm going to stamp in brown walnut ink onto a sentiment banner. Now this sentiment banner is a little longer than I want it to be, so I'm stamping this towards the left, and then I'm going to take the die that cut this sentiment banner out, line it back up again, and trim off the right side so I get a shorter, more perfectly sized banner for my sentiment. Now this is going to fit perfectly right along the bottom of my card. So I'm just going to add some foam squares to this. I'm avoiding the edges because it's going to overlap my trees a little bit. So I'm adding those to the center, and I'm just going to line this up across the bottom. The nice thing about that plaid grass is we can use it to help align our sentiment too. Now to add some more detail to this card, I'm actually using the fall leaves border die, but I'm going to use those individual leaves and this piece of spiffier speckles paper that has that really fun gold foil splatter on it. So I cut a few leaves out. I've just sprinkled them around my card where I want them to go. Some of these I'm adding with some liquid glue and tucking behind my images and my border. Others I'm going to pop up with some foam squares. So if they are on the tree like this one here, I'm just adding a little foam square in there so that my leaf can be popped up just like the tree. And then finally, if you're new to any video from me, I love to use Stardust stickles on cards. So I'm adding my stickles to the branches of the tree and the details of the scarf. And then here is my finished cozy fall card with that cozy cat in the chunky sweater. I just think it's so pretty. These are really fun colors for fall, and look at that shimmer from the foil on the leaves. Next, I'm making a Christmas card. I'm using the lacy rectangles, and I will use the small stitch rectangles that layer right on them. I'm using some of the new All the Sparkles paper, which has the fun gold stars on one side and the stripes on the other. So I'm going to mix and match these. I'm using the stripes for this small rectangle, and then for the background, I'm going to cut down the foil side of this paper to 4¼ by 5½ and add this to my card base. And that's going to be my background with that really great foil shimmer. Now my little cats are going to sit here, but I need some ground for them to sit on. So I just pulled out that same piece of paper that I used for the leaves on the last card. This is the other side because this is a 12 by 12 sheet. So it has foil on one side, and then the other side is a lighter version of that same color, but also with the speckles. So I used that same stitch rectangle to cut this out. Then what I like to do is to put my sentiment on the bottom first before I cut this down. So this card is going to say, "Have a cozy Christmas." So I'm using the word Christmas from the Cozy Cats Christmas add-on. And I've just stamped that right along the bottom. Now I can see how far up I need to cut this stitched hillside border, and I can run that through my die cut machine. For the rest of the sentiment, I want to white emboss this at the top of this stripe piece, so I just treated it with my anti-static powder tool. I'm stamping it in some clear embossing ink and adding some white embossing powder. Then I'll heat this up with my heat tool till that powder melts and we get that nice bright white sentiment on that red stripe background. And I'll just buff away the extra powder with a dry chamois. Now I can add this to my lacy rectangle, and it's going to create that really cute lacy border around the outside. Then I can just add the ground that I cut for my little cats to sit on directly to the bottom, lining that up with the rectangle. Now before I put this onto my card base, I want to add a little texture, and I'm using some white hemp twine to do this. I like to wrap it around my card 3 or 4 times, then tie it in a bow to one side. So I'm tying this in a bow on the left side. Once I get it kind of where I want it, I'll trim off those ends, and that will give me a bow that kind of peeks out to the left side of this smaller rectangle. Now, a little trick I like to do is put my piece upside down so I can see exactly where to put my foam tape. I want to create a little channel through the center for that twine, so I'm going to avoid that with my foam and just put foam at the top and the bottom of this rectangle. Then I can pull off all those liner papers and just pop this little rectangular frame right into the center of this card. And I just love those foil stars that peek out around the outside. Now, of course, we need to add our cozy cats, and these cats are getting dressed up for Christmas. So I'll add the little antlers to this little cat's head. And then I can add all of my images using some foam squares so everything is popped up off of the background. So I have my cute little black cat. I have my cat in the red sweater. Then I'll put a foam square right in the center between them, and that is where my present is going to go. And then finally, I have my little speech bubble that says Meowie Christmas. Now, I always like to embellish my cards with glitter, so I'm adding a little bit to the antlers, the present, and the hat. But I also wanted to add some little embellishments sprinkled around. And for this card, I actually used some gold metallic paper and the sequin mix die to cut out some star sequins. And I like to place them around, figure out where I want their placement, and then go back through, pick each one up, and add a dot of glue and drop them back into place. And I love that this die has 3 different sizes of stars, so you get some nice variety. And then here is my finished Cozy Christmas Cozy Cat card. So let's make one more card with this stamp set, and it's going to be an everyday card. And one of my favorite things to do is to use the 4 square backdrop and create little scenes on a card. Again, I'm pulling out that favorite flannel fall paper. I'm going to be using this teal one this time. And I'm using the white All the Sparkles paper, but I'm going to use the back side with the stripes. It has a fun tone-on-tone white. And then, of course, we're going back to that spiffier speckles paper to create our frame. Now, this die cuts out 4 little squares. That's why it's called the 4 square backdrop. This is actually the landscape version. I like to use it in a portrait orientation a lot. I will just set those squares aside because really I want the frame today. And I'm using the stripes in the vertical direction to kind of look like wallpaper in my little squares. So I'm just cutting that down to 3 1/4 by 5 1/2. And now I need some ground for my cats to sit on. I'm going to cut 2 of those interior squares out of this plaid paper from the Favorite Flannel Fall Petite paper pack. And you might be asking, well, why 2 when there's 4 squares? I can cut the top and the bottom of each square and get a floor line out of each one, and that just makes the most out of my paper. So I will trim the top and the bottom to 1/2 inch and get 4 little pieces that will fit inside these squares for my little cats to sit on. So there's 2 of those. They're going to fit right in there because I used the same die to cut the square out, and we get that nice fun stitching detail around the edges. So now that I've cut all of my pieces, I'm going to go ahead and glue all of this to my card base. So I'm starting with that striped paper. That's sort of my wallpaper for each of these little scenes inside the frame. I like to use liquid glue for a thin frame like this. That way I can shift it around and make sure it's all nice and lined up. And then I can add each of those little plaid pieces that I cut to the bottom of each of these little frames. And I just think this is a really fun mix of colors for an everyday kind of card. Now I am going to stamp my sentiment in that bottom right square that says have a perfect day. Now you could align all these one on top of the other, but I actually wanted them to be a little closer than the stamp would allow. So I'm stamping them separate. So have a perfect. You can see that I moved it up more than that square of the stamp would allow. And then the word day, I can kind of snug it up in there underneath that F of the word perfect. And then I'll just stamp my exclamation point separately. Now I'm ready to add all my cute little cats to these little squares. And this card kind of has a bookshop theme or a coffee shop theme. So I have my cute little cat sitting on the books, which I just think is so cute. Then I have my little cat with a cup of coffee. I actually did stamp the little steam for the coffee and cut that out with the coordinating die from some light gray ink. So I will add him up here as well, sitting on that little plaid floor that we created. Then this guy, like I said, he's in a coffee shop, so he's not wearing earmuffs today, he's wearing some headphones. I also have the little speech bubble that says curl up with a good book to go with my bookstore theme. And then I thought it would be fun to add these little balls of yarn to my sentiment panel down here at the bottom. So I added that one with foam, and then this one I will tuck behind and glue that directly to the background. Now I do have some little music notes to go with my headphones for this little cat that's listening to music. These little music notes are actually from the Caroling Mice stamp set, and you could stamp these directly onto the background. There is a little stamp that has the little sleepy Z's, which I'm adding for this little cat. And since this is a winter set, there's some little snowflakey kind of stamps in here. There is a single one that I decided to stamp around with some manatee ink. Now that second one I stamped there, somehow I had too much ink, so it's very dark. It kind of bothered me a little bit, and usually I would put something over top of it, but its placement was so high up there, I didn't want to do that, and I just decided to accept it. It is handmade after all, and sometimes we have some imperfections. I'm adding my glitter little accents to all of my images, and now my perfect card is done. I love this kind of everyday bookstore theme to this card. So we made a everyday card, a fall card, and a Christmas card, all using the new Cozy Cats stamp set. I just love that you can stretch this stamp set all year long. So here is another look at all of those fun cards, and I hope it has inspired you to make some cards of your own. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.